Oh, goodness. This is going to be an interesting one. Hello and welcome to Fall Through, your source for deep conversations about technology, software, and computing. I'm your host, Chris Brando, also known as Scriptable. And on today's episode, it's Matt and me and Dylan. We've got a third. This is going to be a fun panel. And we're going to start our conversation today by talking about a very interesting proposal to add a very simple thing, UUIDs, to the standard library. If you want to follow along, the issue number is 62026. But we have a lot of opinions about this proposal and the conversation happening in it. So we're going to talk about it. And we're going to talk about some other stuff too, I'm sure. We never stay on just one topic, do we? As per usual, there is supporter-only content, so if you're not a supporter, you should become one today by going to fallthrough.fm/subscribe. And if you're not following us on social media, please give us a follow there, and hit that subscribe and like button if you're on YouTube. And with that, let's get into the show. Hello, viewer/listener. Welcome back to Fall Through. It's a overcast day here in New York, which is sad. I would like the sun to be out. But also, as an overcast, is this issue that we're going to talk about that there's so many opinions on. We were talking before we started recording. We have a lot of feels about this that need to be expressed. But there was sunshine, and now there are clouds. There was sunshine, and now there is raining on our parades. But joining me today is Dylan and Matt. Dylan, we haven't seen you in a bit. How you doing?
Doing good. I mean, life is life.
That is a statement. That's a tautological statement.
I thought he was going to say more after that. I was like, oh, life is life. And like, I got a new dog or like, I don't know. Just I thought there was one more thing. Yeah.
My oldest is getting married in October. So we're starting to plan that. So
nice.
I mean, doing life things.
How old is your oldest?
24.
Oh.
I'm an old man, Chris.
You're an old man.
See, look at the gray.
Yeah. Old man.
My microphone covers my grays.
Yeah. My grays aren't that bad today. Matt, how are you doing today?
Good. The gloomy day, I was ready to just stay in bed. I'm not going to lie. I was so comfy there. So
it is kind of annoying after having two really nice days of like 60 to 70 degree weather for to now just be overcast and sad.
Yep. Perfect day for cuddling.
Yeah, just like stay in the bed. Yeah.
We had that. It was really nice beginning of the week, and today it's raining and in the low 50s.
That's where it is here. Wow, it's the same temperature here as in Louisiana. How interesting. Anyway, we are here to talk about this proposal.
What should have been the least contentious proposal in the history of Go.
So here's the thing I want to say, like at the front of this, is that this is a proposal to add something that has an IETF standard to the standard library.
That is 20 years old, no less.
Yeah. And like there's a newer one that's like the last couple of years that adds V8, but like this, I feel like this should probably be the simplest and most straightforward thing to like either implement or add to the standard library because it's a standard. I feel like the answer is just implement the standard, and it feels like there's a lot of apprehension to just implementing the standard. It feels real weird. But I think there's multiple levels of on like that we can evaluate this issue to not talk about just the weirdness of us not implementing UUID in a simple way, but also the weirdness of the conversation that is happening here, because I think there's many a problem with this conversation that we should be talking about as a community, because this is not great. It reminds me of the bad old module days with how people are behaving, and like I thought we were past that as a community. But what are your guys' initial thoughts on this issue?
So, like I said, when I first saw it, I was like, cool, I like it. I'm one that's been kind of on the side of there should be a UUID package in the standard library because it's a standard and we shouldn't all have to re-implement it for a while now. So I was excited when I first saw the proposal pop up. Then, of course, the first comment is, people have asked for this before and it was rejected. What's different now? So right out the gate, the sentiment was soured. And as I read through the comments, it just got more and more depressing, to be honest. I weighed in late yesterday afternoon with kind of my thoughts on it, and not without rehashing the 200 plus comments before mine, kind of like, hey, this is reasonable, but I think I made 3 points. Like, here are 3 points that I want to specifically call out based on my personal experience maintaining an open source UUID library for the last 6 years. A, B, and C. And I ruffled some feathers, apparently, because I immediately got not flamed, but way more pushback than my comment should have warranted. Like, why are you even complaining about this? We talked about this, and we decided we're not going to do it, so go away, was the sentiment that I got.
Yeah. Which I'll bring up a couple times. That feels like a code of conduct violation. We're supposed to be welcoming. So the fact that a new person to the thread dropped it and said something, it was effectively disregarded. Someone should have popped up and cited the code of conduct at them, but no one did. So we'll talk about that later.
Yeah. So I started off very excited, and today I'm just about to the point where I'll just not use it, whether they do it or not, and I'll continue using the library that we already maintain.
I mean, I think that that's likely going to be the result that many people wind up with, unfortunately, because like there's so many little edge cases and things about that they just decided they're not going to handle, which like ultimately I'm like, if you don't want to implement this fully, that's fine, but like please have a coherent reason why. And like there's not a lot of coherence in these discussions. Also, at a whole level, this is not a great way to do API design, right? This is not a design that I feel like someone sat down and really thought through the space and actually came up with like a proposal. It's like, let's just go with Go UID stuff and borrow some of this API, but not the whole thing. And let's try to do some analysis, but not deep analysis to figure out which things we should support and which things we shouldn't. There's a lot of like weirdness in how this API was designed in the first place that I think also led to this excessive amount of conversation and back and forth. Like, I feel like the problem with this conversation thread is that there's nothing for everybody to look at and to agree that they are talking about the same thing. There's a lot of people proposing different ideas, and those ideas being talked about in abstract ways. And there is some like discussion among community members trying to understand each other and trying to really flesh out the ideas. But I haven't seen a lot of the Go team engaging in that way. Or when they do engage in that way, they tend to do this thing where they just shut down the conversation and say, we won't do that. Like, and not give a good reason or explanation.
This is like not the right avenue for these proposals. Like this reminds me of something that Brian Cantrell said on a podcast episode the other day. I forget which episode it was, but he's just like, companies, they buy like a hiring program like Greenhouse or something, right? They buy like a hiring product, and then that product is shaped in such a way that it dictates your company's hiring process, and it's backwards. Right? Like your hiring process is supposed to dictate the tools you use, not the other way around. And it's the same thing here in GitHub. Like we're using issues to facilitate discussions, and these issues suck for discussions because there's no way to like have a golden like proposal that we can all follow. That's why you see here people restating the proposal, and then everything's locked behind like a load more button to load more comments. Like this is not the right avenue for any of this stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have such a difficulty in like having actual discussions, because the avenue is wrong, right? The tool is wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, GitHub is not great for that. I'll say that, especially the fact that load more pops up. Like you see the first 30 comments and then load more and then the last 10, and all of the other context is gone. And there's also not a good way, especially with something with a lot of comments like this, there's not a good way to pick up where you left off.
Oh, no.
There's not a, I've gotten through the first 163 comments, but I have to go take care of my kids now, and I'm going to come back later. Now you have to go scroll through and try to find where you left off.
And the fact that like the load more button loads the top and not the bottom. So if you got almost to the end, but you didn't quite get to the end, and where you were was buried in the load more, you got to load the entire thread. You can't just like load the last 30. You have to load the next 30, which is probably like an API constraint. I'm not really sure, but yeah, like this is like trying to use Slack before threads existed, right? It's just like. Because that's the other thing happening in here is that there's no thread. You can't follow. It's really hard to follow a conversation thread in this because it's just people kind of replying to each other. And you don't know if someone's like replying to the last comment or some comment upstream. It's like not a great interface for this.
Yeah. Well, the Go team solved that. They just linked back to their previous comments when they told you what they were going to do.
Yeah, I just... Because, you know, I'm reading a few proposals now, and like they all just devolve into the same thing. You know, it's just a bunch of like a useless discussion that restates in slightly different ways the same thing, and nobody can point to like the golden standard of what's being proposed. And then, like you said, Dylan, we've discussed this in random issue number with zero context that I have to click through and figure out what's going on here. Please see that issue. Like, why? Why can't you just tell me? Like,
Yeah,
you know, it's so annoying to just put links in front of someone's face and just be like, yep, this is covered before. And then you actually read those links and you're like, actually, no, it wasn't covered before. And then you come back to the original thing like, no, I don't think you know what you're talking about. Then,
like Kris was saying, the cruel irony with this one is there is a golden spec. There is a standard. It's documented. It's on the internet. You can just go read it. It's been around for 20 years.
Yeah. I mean, UUID's been around for like 50 years, right? And I think in the same form. I don't think the format has changed.
I looked it up, and the original RFC was in June of 2005.
Oh, yeah, 4122.
July of 2005. So it was formalized into an IETF RFC in 2005.
Yeah.
So 21 years ago.
Not long enough for the Go 1.0 compatibility promise. Sorry. Can't accept.
The Apollo computer in the 1980s was the first one to use UUIDs. So, yeah. It's an old computer. But yeah, no, it's like, and I think UUIDs have been the same, well, ish. There is the weirdness of Microsoft deciding to use little endian ordering instead of big endian byte ordering. Which will be a problem for anybody that generates
in only some of the segments, not all of them.
Well, yes. Yeah.
Because why not?
Which like also brings up an interesting thing about like there's a lot of conversation in here about like really not letting things be configurable. And it's just like, well, what if you're on Windows, you need to generate a UUID that uses the little endian ordering for those parts. You're just out of luck. Okay, well, I guess we can't use this library then or the package then.
Yeah, and that's kind of the sad end result is, like I was saying, that's going to be what happens. Is lots of people are just going to go, well, I can't use this.
I think too, like this is going to cause an undue amount of inside of organizations, right? Because like the whole reason we had to get modules, the whole reason we had to do a whole bunch of this stuff is because software engineering, like Go needs to support software engineering in the large. We need to support large organizations or large groups of people building software. Well, having a UUID package in the standard library that implements some but not all of the functionality you need is going to lead to conversations. Like I've had these conversations about other standard library stuff in the past where people are like, why are we using the third-party library? Why aren't we just using the thing in the standard library? And sometimes people don't understand the full context of a thing. So it's just like, okay, well, now I have to sit down. I have to explain to you that the standard library doesn't do all of the things that we need it to do. And then like the next thing that a lot of people will say is, okay, well, let's just use the standard library and build our own thing on top of it, which then just fractures the implementation ecosystem even more, right? So either like you're going to wind up where people stay on either Google UUID, which they probably shouldn't because it's like unmaintained, or switch to the Gophers /UUID package, or people that can use just v4 and v7 in these default configurations will switch to the UUID. So like it feels like the goal of this was to unify the community, and it feels like this will not actually do that unification. Like you're not like people like Dylan, you and everybody else that are maintaining Gopher's UUID will not be able to archive that repo as a result of this functionality getting added to the standard library.
Yes, and I was more than happy to do it. Like, cool, we don't have to maintain this anymore. So kind of another ironic bit is we're actively working on a bug now related specifically to generating V1 UUIDs at extremely high volumes and getting duplicate values.
Right.
One of the arguments on the GitHub issue from the Go team is that no one's using anything other than V4 and V7. Like those edge cases in those other versions are tough. They're hard to maintain. They're hard to track down. They're can be difficult to reproduce. So I'd be more than happy to not deal with it anymore if there was a canonical implementation that everyone can just pull in. But that's not what we're getting. We're getting like 10% of the RFC spec.
Yeah. And I will say that part of the thing that's frustrating about this is that a lot of the decisions that have been made, or maybe not a lot, but there's been a number of times that one of these kind of near the beginning comments, one of the Go team members posted all of this, like did a, as he calls it, or they call it, a partial ecosystem survey of UUID implementers, importers, and they've been using this as a basis as to like why they shouldn't support like UUID v1 or whatever. Mind you, even in this analysis, new UUID, which returns to v1 UUID, has more usages than v7, and yet they will not support v1, and they say they will support v7, which is not following the data here. Of course, that gets later on hand-waved off as basically saying, we didn't actually want UUID v1, you just saw a new UUID and decided to use that, which is a very odd thing to say, I think, or an odd conclusion to draw. But like, this is like the most basic of data, right? There's no analysis here about like longitudinally. So there's nothing that says like what is the adoption rate of these different API calls you could have, methods and functions. There's also just like, it doesn't say here whether these are like, for instance, it says new has 14,882 usages. That doesn't say if that is like 14,000 individual packages or modules that are using this new function, or if that's just the number of times that new got called in packages or modules. And like, which one of those is the metric we should be going off of? I'm not sure. Do you want to do by raw usage or by like unique usage? I don't know, but this data doesn't have any of that information in it. And I think without knowing like what is the adoption rate of things like v7 over time, because if new users have been using v7, like if 100% of the new package consumers have been using v7 and nobody's using v4, then that tells you that v7 is the necessary thing. Or if a whole bunch of people are using v1 and not using v4, then that also tells you something, but that's not discernible in this data. But the Go team is treating this data as if it is like a comprehensively done and well-designed survey of the ecosystem. But it is not. This was just someone just doing a really rough analysis at the end of the day. And they keep sticking on it to basically tell people, they use it to swat people down. But when people point out that there's usage in here, there's things that are in here that tells you, hey, people are using these things. They then basically say, oh, it doesn't matter, right? So they're using it to both, they're appealing to it when it benefits them and discrediting it when it doesn't appeal to them. And that's just like not a very charitable argument to have or way of positioning yourself.
Even within that, like, yes, new is the most commonly referenced API from Google UUID.
Right.
That's also because it's the most obvious endpoint. It follows the standard Go convention. Package name.new returns a new thing from that package. It's at the top of the docs. It's the first thing that everyone sees.
Yeah.
I'm very skeptical that that many people are intentionally choosing to use the new function and not using it as the default.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that. It seems like the thing that most people are doing here is that they're calling new and they're getting a string and that's it, which is perfectly fine usage. But there's still like a good number of people here that are doing something different. I will also say, as I thought about this before and thinking about this data, that this is clearly a survey of things that are likely in the module proxy, right? Or at least code that is easily accessible by someone on the Go team, which would slant heavily toward open source code, right? Because that's the code that's out there. I would suspect the users of V1, definitely of V2, but of V1, V2, V3, 5, and 6, I would expect those to be much more enterprisey environments, especially the usage of V1. I would expect to see that a lot more in enterprise environments, places that have a lot of legacy, that have other code that generates UUID v1, so they need to generate UUID v1 or v6. I would expect those ecosystems to be not open source, so not actually surveyable by this type of ecosystem survey. And like, again, as I brought up before on the podcast, like most Go code written is private. Like most of the Go code that exists right now is not in the module proxy and will never be in the module proxy because most of it's written by private companies and private individuals that just aren't going to open source it. So also saying, oh, because we don't see usage in open source, so it's not being used is really incorrect. It's incorrect science. It's incorrect stats you're doing here because you're not controlling for the fact that this population will likely be using UUID v4 because they're using UIDs for a very specific reason, which is like, I just need some random identifier. They're probably not interfacing with legacy systems, and there's probably not a lot of libraries that are open source that are meant for interacting with legacy systems.
Yeah, the simple case is just the unique part. I need a unique identifier. We're sending something over the wire, and I want to be able to point to it later. I need something that I can attach to this thing that is going to be unique and identifiable. That's V4. But then, like, the whole reason V7 exists is people figured out that V4s actually are random data, which means you can't compare them in a sense of, is this one before or after, greater than, less than? That's why V7 was created. So lots of people figured out it would be really nice if we could compare these unique identifiers to tell which ones were created before versus after. One of the use cases brought up on the GitHub issue is database indexes. Random data doesn't index well. V7 UUIDs index much better in most database systems.
So I also think that this is slightly like the reason for making UUID v7 is not necessarily that people are using UUID v4 and that they needed an option that was like less graphically sortable, because v6 gives you that, right? V6 has been around. I think v6 is in RFC 122, so it's been around for 20 years. Like, let me just make sure real quick. RFC 9562
4122.
Yeah, 4122.
Am I remembering the number right?
Or maybe oh wait, the version's not in here. This spec is just written so much differently than the current one. Okay, no, V6 must have been added with
V6 was added in 9562, which is the May 2024.
Yeah, so like the reason why V6 exists, right, is because V1 is not sortable by just like the opaque string. So what V6 does is it swaps around the way the bits are so that you can just sort on it. And the reason you have V7 is so that you can have a different way of doing the timestamp, right? Instead of having it be this weird, like, what is it, like, I don't remember how V1's constructed, but it's not using standard Unix epoch, which is weird.
Yeah, and V1, the timestamp value is split into two different sections within the bits.
Well, it's not even that it's split into two different sections. It's a problem. It's that time low is the first chunk, right? So if you want to sort it, you can sort V1, right? But you just have to have special logic to introspect the UUID in order to pull out the timestamp and then sort based on that timestamp, which is not great and not what people really wanted to be doing. So that's why we made V6 and then V7. Oh yeah, like the UUID V1 is a time-based UID featuring a 60-bit timestamp represented by coordinated universal time as a count of 100 nanosecond intervals since midnight, October 15th, 1582, the date of Gregorian reform to the Christian calendar, right? So like that's when they picked to start the clock. And it's in 100 nanosecond intervals.
You have to pick somewhere.
Yeah, so it's in what centa micros. I don't know. I guess there probably isn't a term for this. But yeah,
100 nanoseconds is a tenth of a microsecond.
Yes. So it's
So decimicroseconds.
Basically, decimicroseconds.
We're inventing units.
So like that wasn't great, and it's also in the UID in like a weird way, right? With again the low part of the time bits are at the front. So then they're like, okay, well we'll add UUID v6, and then that will have things in the correct order, so that at least if you're generating these, you'll be able to flip you can just use the lexicographical sorting. And then people, I guess, were also like, maybe we should just not use this weird 100 nanosecond thing. And so then that's when V7 was added, that uses just like a standard Unix epic timestamp in milliseconds, because that's what we all got easy access to, not 100 nanosecond increments since 1582, which is, I can imagine that must be so annoying to calculate.
Math is hard.
That's an ugly function to write instead of just time.now.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, but like we've had a sortable UID for the entire time. It's just not friendly to use. So,
and I mean, someone made and this will be a code of conduct violation, the snide comment that V4 UUIDs are technically sortable. You can just compare the bytes. Well, sure, but dev random is also sortable if that's your criteria.
There's so many weird arguments that are made in this thread. I just don't understand it.
Yeah,
I've been reading this whole thread, and it's very funny. The proposed API is fine. Like overall, like I don't hate it, but I don't think having new is even necessary. Like just let people choose.
Yeah, so that was two of my points were don't include new. It's confusing. So for the listeners, the API is 3 constructor functions: new v4, and new v7. And new just calls new v4. And the argument was what we were talking about. They did a survey of usages of Google UUID, and the new function is called the most, so that's what people want. So my counter there is that's confusing, and it's a guaranteed way to create a later argument about the Go 1 compatibility promise, because what if new needs to change? So just don't do it. Let people call new v4 or new v7. Simple. My second
Google
point
API,
was.
Sorry. I was gonna talk about your first point.
Go ahead.
The Google API, like, yeah, sure, most usages are using new because V7 wasn't added until much later. Like, that's like saying, like, oh, I have a taco truck and I've sold tacos for a while, and now I just started selling pizzas. Like, oh, but most people get tacos, so we should just like always sell tacos. It's like, yeah, because I never sold pizzas before, like, but everyone now wants pizzas. It's a very interesting thing. Like I get really mad when they do this whole, like, we searched GitHub and we saw that the data says this. Yeah, but you're not acknowledging any of the bias of that data ever.
Yeah.
Sorry, I rest my case. Please tell me your second point.
And the second point is the introspection. So they've made the command decision that they're not going to implement the ability to extract the bits, the timestamp, the version, the variant, the DCEID, the various subcomponents within the different versions. Just so we're not doing it.
Like to return them as a typed structure.
Or even to just extract, even as a number.
You have to do that yourself.
Yeah. So we exercise for the gopher is the term I've been using. And it's like, no, that include that. People need that. That's what makes it useful.
Yeah.
Does the Google UUID package include this?
Yes.
Okay. I was just curious. I haven't.
The Google UUID one, I think the Gophers package, the Gophers also does include this. Like,
I was even being accommodating and like, okay, maybe not everything for every version, but at least add a version method that returns the value of those 4 bits. And I got pushed back on that. Like, no, we're not doing that. You can just write that yourself.
The strange thing about this is that like there's not there's a lack of consistency in what's being argued, right? Like I think there's a lot of really good defensible positions here. Like one of them would be we want to use UIDs in the standard library. The standard library cannot depend on external things. So, and we only have use needs for v4 and v7 in the standard library. So we're only going to implement this, and we're not going to put it behind internal because this might be useful for some people. So this is what we're going to add. You know what? If that was the argument, sure, fine. Great. You have an internal need for this. This is the minimal surface that suits the internal need. It's not meant to be not meant to be a replacement for anything in the ecosystem. It's just like a thing you need. You need it for the standard library. Implement it. Good. Fine. Okay, great. I think that's a very reasonable assertion to make, or a reasonable reason to add only new v4 and new v7 and kind of little bit of stuff around the edges. It would also be reasonable it'd seem reasonable to me if they said, we did a comprehensive analysis of all of the UUID packages in the ecosystem, notably both Google UUID and Gopher's UUID. And we did a in-depth analysis of, over time, figuring out what APIs people are using, looking at the adoption rate, projecting out forward the adoption rate. We also did some surveys through our surveying channel to see if people were interested in UUIDs. And based on that information, here's what people said that they wanted, and this is the API we're going to go with because of the data supports it and our surveying supports it, and here are our methodologies. Here is the data if you want to crunch it yourself, and this is the proposed API. I think that would be reasonable. I also think it would have been reasonable to say there's an RFC about this. The RFC is very well constrained. It's laid out things very well. We can see that between the RFC 4122 and 9562, that none of the stable versions that already existed have been changed in any way, and we've just added new things. The IETF supports backward compatibility, so we're pretty sure that if we implement all of 9562, that a new version of the RFC that obsolete this one will not make backward incompatible changes. So we're just going to implement as much of the API surface as we can because it's stable and we'll only have to deal with bug fixes in it going into the future. I think that would have been fine. I think it would have been fine to say, this conversation is clearly not settled. We need to do a test API and give it to the community to use and see what issues and such people file. So we're going to put this in a golang.org/x repo, and we're going to see if people use it. And if they use it a lot, then we'll move into the standard library once we've settled on the API. I think that would have been reasonable. What I don't think is reasonable is we're not going to use this in the standard library. We did a very rough data survey. We have not released any of the methodology of it. We're only going to implement these specific features of the package because we're worried about future maintenance cost without actually specifying what those maintenance costs could possibly be. And we're not going to implement some things because our reading of the best practice recommendations in the specification says that you shouldn't do this thing because I've misread the specification. And therefore, we're only going to implement these 3 main methods and the surrounding stuff you need to parse and marshal them. Like, that seems like a not great way to approach adding something to the standard library, right? Like with the amount of discussion on this issue, it doesn't seem reasonable to me that we would be anywhere near putting this in standard library. Even with the amount of discussion on this proposal, it's weird that this is still in the likely accept proposal, like final comment period. Like, I don't know why this hasn't moved out of final comment. I don't know why this hasn't moved out of likely accept. Like that, it doesn't make sense to me why that hasn't happened, because there's so much contention around this.
There's almost a feel of it's likely accept because we're doing this and it doesn't matter what anyone says.
Yes. It feels like this is like like they decided that we're going to do this now. And because they decided that we're going to do this now, they're going to keep moving forward with doing it. And I think that's like a bad mistake, because I think this is going to fracture the ecosystem when we just could not do that. Like, sure, I mean, this issue has been open for 2.5 years now, right? It got open in August 14th, 2023. It's been open for 2.5, going on 3 years. I think it's okay if we just wait. Like, I think we've waited a long time. I think we can wait some more time. It's weird to me that we're now trying to push this thing so forward when there is not consensus in the community. And honestly, it reminds me of modules again. And like, modules caused a whole bunch of problems when we were going to implement it. Like, however you feel about modules in like now, those years from like 2018 until like 2022 were absolutely awful.
It's way better now.
Yeah. It's better now.
I was there in the early days when it was clunky and you had to hand copy replace directives everywhere and remember to take them out before you committed to source control. And it was bad. It's nice now.
And like, this is not going to be that level of problem, but like, this is the same type of behavior that led to that problem, right? The pushing forward, the ignoring the requests of community members, even when they put in a ton of effort to explain to you why they should have this thing, when they've demonstrated that it's used elsewhere, right? Like, at the end of the day, when I read this thread, it feels like the Go team is continually violating the code of conduct, right? The thing they say to other people. I don't think a reasonable person reading this would find would find the way they are speaking to people to be welcoming. It's certainly not open. They keep foreclosing things onto people. I don't think they're taking the most generous interpretation of what people are saying. I don't think they're trying to view the things other people are saying in the best light. Like, I think there's just like you could just go down the list of things in the code of conduct, and the Go team is not adhering to it. And like, my question, which has been my question for a long time, is like, why are we holding the Go team to a lower standard than we hold the community? Why is it that it's community members getting cited for COC violations, but not the Go team, when the Go team's behavior is similar? And this is the exact same thing we went through with modules that led to a community member being banned for life for having conduct that was very much the same as what Go team members were doing. And so it's like, how are we still doing this? Why are we still doing this? That's the thing I don't understand. Like, why has this not gotten better? We've had a leadership change, right? We have a whole new set of leadership, and yet still we have this problem. And that's something that we as a community, I mean, we're talking about community last episode, that's something we as a community need to start fixing. Because this conversation thread, like, I have not commented on this because I refuse to get involved and be disrespected in the way that there's so much disrespect going on in this. I will not wade into this. I will not, because I don't buy into the idea that just because you say something nicely means that you're not being rude, means you're not being disrespectful, right? There's been the 2 code of conduct violation claims in this thread have been people reacting to the hostility of the Go team, but the Go team says it in a nice way. They don't say in a snarky way, but they do say rude things to people continually. They say disrespectful things to people continually. And I will not take my own time to be disrespected by people in this way.
There's very much an air of dismissiveness from the Go team in the comments there. Like, well, we've done the research, air quotes, research, and our research says you don't need that.
Yes, we're back to paternalism, really. We're back to, like, here's my maybe this is an unpopular opinion, or like the starkest way I could say this, of like, the Go team doesn't understand their place, right? You as the Go team have no business being in my application telling me what I should be able to do in my own application.
Yeah, that was one of my arguments on the thread was this is not. So you referenced the best practices in the RFC, and several times they talk about application constraints, and applications may need to things like that. And kind of the way I phrased my comment was, this package is not an application. It's a library. It should be providing the tools, like generate UUIDs, let me pick them apart, let me satisfy the needs of my application.
Yeah.
You don't get to pre-decide which use cases are valid.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing. Like, I've been a library maintainer, right? I spent a few years maintaining an open source library, a pretty big and important one in the ecosystem. And it's like, when I was sat down to design things, I was not like, well, people shouldn't be doing things this way, so I'm not going to support it. I would say, well, someone needs to do this, and I see why this would be a legitimate thing to do and why they need to do in their application. Let's figure out how to support that thing. Because that's how a library maintainer should be focusing on things. You should be trying to support the most number of people possible that you can. And like saying, oh, I have a maintenance burden in the future, then why are you adding this at all if you're worried about a maintenance burden? Like that's the lines are not clearly stated here.
Yeah, my philosophy there for kind of library maintainer is, unless it's actually provably problematic, like, no, if you do this, it's going to cause XYZ problems, then your use case is valid. Like, you can push back on an API and say, no, we're not going to do that because it would create X other bugs, or it would cause information leakage, or whatever the counter argument would be. But some identifiable problem that doing that would cause. Beyond just, well, I don't think enough people are going to want that.
Yeah. And it's telling too, because like, I think this new function is one of those things that's like, it doesn't fit with the rest of their arguments and they keep arguing it, right? If you want to have a smaller API service and they're like, well, people might call a new V7 when they actually want a V4. I'm like, user error is like not something that I think you should be worried about here, because like calling new V7 and getting a UUID that's a V7, like the worst you can do is like if you're using it in like a database that has like index locality issues, like that'll blow up you'll like make hot nodes in your distributed database. But like the same thing could be argued about getting a new V4 when you think that it's probably going to return a new V7 because you didn't read the documentation and V7's the newest thing that people are using. So I think that it's equally reasonable to think that new would return a V7 instead of a V4, because V7 is the newer thing. We added it because it is default sortable. People are using UUIDs in places where sorting is probably the thing you'd want to do. That like the biggest thing people use it for is replacing the index, or this uniquely increment, or the incremental serial ID in database columns. And actually, I'm gonna look this up real quick, but I'm pretty sure in Symfony, which is I think probably the biggest PHP framework out there, UUID v7 is the default they use when you're adding something to a database. But I'll confirm that in a second. But so it's like they actually recommend using UUID v7 instead of v1 because of better entropy. And then I'll look this up in a second. But I'm pretty sure that they use UUID v7 by default.
And for distributed databases, they don't require a synchronized call within all of the nodes to get the next integer. Each node can generate its own new UUID v7.
Yes.
Without having to synchronize.
Exactly. And so it's like, I think that the whole argument about new here, about new being like B4 by default, or it can cause just as much confusion for people as having it be V4 by default.
Yeah. It still bugs me that they did it with the hedge comment. Today,
well, that's
this is equivalent to new V4, but we reserve the right to change it later.
Yeah.
Like, just don't.
Sorry, I'm looking the Symfony thing up because I gotta.
Even the simple API, half of the API is marshal text, unmarshal text, like implementing the integration interfaces. There's been this whole debate about integrating with database SQL or not. The actual UUID API that they're proposing is the 3 constructors and a parse function to take a string and turn it into the slice of bytes. And that's it. That is the sum total of the API.
Yeah, it's very anemic. It's very there's not a lot there.
Yeah, with a lot of hand wavy. Well, we're exposing the slice. You can just implement it yourself if you need to inspect the values.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Yeah, you by default Symfony, which is it's up there with WordPress. It's like, the one of the biggest. It's basically the de facto standard library for PHP. Right, that's what Symfony is. PHP has a standard library. It's not like a standard library, so it's not as great. But like Symfony is the underpinning of a whole bunch of different frameworks, including Laravel and Drupal. It is absolutely gigantic, right? And their default for creating new UUID is V7. Like V7 is a completely reasonable thing to use as a default for the UUID. I think you brought this up, but I think the most common case is people using this and shoving it in not a distributed database, but shoving it in a database instead of using a serial incrementing ID. And I think V4 doesn't do that. It's going to blow up your indexes. So I think it's completely reasonable to have new return V7, which is why there just shouldn't be a new. I don't think there is a good argument for V4 outside of, and I think this is the thing. I think this is an unsaid thing that I've seen a couple people from the Go team assume. People from the Go team assume that everybody has been using V4 as the default for a long time. But I think they need to read the RFC. I think the thing is they need to read the RFC because the reason why V6 and V7 and to some degree V8 were added is because people were not using UUIDs. Because UUIDs, V1 is not lexicographically sortable, and neither is V4 for like if you're sorting it based on like time or increment numbers, right? So they have 16 different UUID things, including ULIDs and snowflakes and a whole bunch of different of these types of things that are all lexicographically sortable, right? That they use as the basis for how they designed V6 and V7 and adding V8, right? The whole point of this new spec was to unify this vast landscape of people that were not using UIDs because they were random. And so if you go do your survey and you only look at people using UIDs, of course it's going to tell you that they're using V4 because that's all people were using UIDs for. And there's this entire other landscape of people either inventing their own schemes or using one of the many, 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 many properly sortable, timestamp-based, unique identifier schemes that exist out there instead of it. And this data survey does not regard any of that because all of those are effectively V7 UIDs out in the wild, right? So their arguments about UID V4 being the default is, well, technically correct, it's in the grander scope of things, very incorrect. And like it's shown that they think that UIDs are only meant to be randomly generated by them, first putting it under crypto, which it never made sense to be put there because V3 and V5 are perfectly legitimate use cases. And also the idea that like, oh, well, we're not going to add generators because randomness is not state. Thinking that because V4 uses randomness, that everything else has only randomness and not state, but the reality is all of the other ones do have state that you probably want to be using.
They specifically have state. They have node IDs and security IDs and like
they have counters. They have
there's random data, there's timestamp, but then there's consistent data on purpose.
Yeah, and like
they are designed to be identifiable and traceable.
And here's the thing, right? I would say, like, I've been a distributed system engineer for a long time now. And in the systems I design now, when I design an ID, I pack more information in there, right? I will put things like a node ID in there so I can be sure that I can just uniquely generate things, or I can do things with counters involved in them, and that I won't have collision problems, because I want to be able to do collision detection locally. And if you don't have a node identifier in there, you cannot guarantee that. You cannot do collision detection.
Yeah. And an important aspect of that is you can't... Allocating node IDs is a problem anyway, but you can't let that eliminate the idea of, let's include a node ID in the identifier so that we can identify things. Yeah. Like, sure, allocating node IDs is difficult, but that's an orthogonal problem.
Yeah, it's entirely orthogonal. Like, yes, it is a challenge to do that, but that's also, like, that is out of scope for this package, really. Right? That's not a concern that the Go team... How my system generates unique node IDs to put into my UIDs is not a concern of the Go team.
Yes, that's...
And, like...
a separate problem.
And this is the thing of, like, the code of conduct implores us to be open and welcoming and to think about others. And, again, the Go team isn't doing this. Like, the Go team is not being open to what other people need. The Go team is continually saying, well, we don't think enough people need that thing to justify it. Which, again, where is the balance there? How many people is enough? Right? What if, there's 14,000 usages of UUID.new. If you do a survey of people using Snowflake and ULIDs and all this other stuff, I bet you will find more than 14,000 usages. I bet you will find a huge number of usages. And since those are equivalent to V7, that would mean that V7 is heavily used, right? Even if you take the charitable reading of the spec of saying the IETF found it to be such a problem that people weren't using UIDs, even though they probably would want to be, that they put in the hard effort to write a new specification so that they could include all of these people that were making things that weren't UUIDs, that honestly should be UUIDs because the UUID space didn't have space for them. Like, the whole reason RFC 9562 exists is because V4 was insufficient for people's needs, and as was V1. And now you have a whole bunch of people sitting here saying, well, we're not going to include that functionality in a way you really need it because we just don't think you're going to use it. Right? They begrudgingly added V7 to this specification. It feels...
I mean, they begrudgingly added string parse.
Well, that too. That was...
Like, it just feels like why even, like, just close the proposal. Honestly, just close the proposal then. Like, there's no point in putting a half-baked, UUID package that's going to lead people to still using other UUID packages.
Yeah, that was one of my thoughts on it, was like, okay, you have various arguments and maintenance and this and that and Go and compatibility promise, and all of that is neither here nor there, because at the end of the day, the thing has to be useful, which means it has to provide the functionality that consumers need. And as a maintainer and looking at the usage of Google UUID and all these other things, like, people are using these things. They're there for a reason. They're included in the spec. Someone will need to validate the version. And punting that off as, well, you can just slice off those 4 bits yourself is such a disingenuous argument to me. Like,
yeah,
to have the difference in the ecosystem impact of having that one-line function exist in one place alongside the definition of the type versus everyone having their own implementation of that, wrapping the standard library UUID, or not cutting over from Gophers or Google UUID to the standard library because those don't exist, or just the difference in the overall ecosystem with not doing it, to me, is just, it's night and day, and it's asinine to dismiss it out of hand as, well, we're not doing that because you can write that one line yourself.
Yeah, I spent some time to reply to this proposal while we were all...
Is that what you were doing instead of talking to us?
Yes,
how very
that's
dare.
what I was doing. I was reading and I replied, but like I kept coming back to the same three things that we kind of were discussing. New, just get that out. New, get rid of that. That does not need to be in there at all. That is silly. Get rid of it. You know what you're doing. We're just repeating the stupid freaking, read file or the, func new pointer return ampersand. We're just repeating these stupid mistakes that we've already moved from in Go. So like, let's not do it again. And then like the other 2 points that I made were like, if it's so easy to implement these other version checking things or whatever, and add more state, then why not just put it in the standard library? If that's how easy it is, just do it then, right? Like why are you having Gophers do it when you could just do it in the standard library? And then the other thing is just like if you ship a package that other people that people are still using other third-party packages for, that's a failure. Like might as well just not ship the thing then.
Yeah. I will correct. They did not begrudgingly add V7. That seems to have appeared as soon as the new RC shipped. It's the making it configurable that has been pushed back on a lot, as in being able to provide the timestamp you want to use or want to start at or want to be an offset from. That's the thing that they have pushed back a lot on. Which, again, I feel like that, if someone's just like, I want to be able to use this for whatever reason, I would say, okay, that's something to push back on. But someone literally said, hey, what if I'm like inserting data from like before into my database, but I want it to have the timestamps from before? Like if I'm processing an old backlog of stuff, what if I do want to say, oh, insert this actually from like last Tuesday instead of from today, so it fits into the sort order correctly? I feel like that's a pretty legitimate use case.
Kind of like we said with the modules thing, we have heard your request and we have found them wanting. Go away.
Yeah. Well, I gotta read Matt's comment now. Matt, you gotta say more stuff so I can read your comment.
Oh yeah, I'll say more things. It was a pretty brief comment. I didn't want to go crazy. It was just, yeah, I don't know. I don't like to see standard, like, I don't know. I don't like to see standard libraries that are useless. Like don't put packages in the standard library if they're not going to actually serve the needs of the community. And like, I'm just tired of hearing, oh, we ran the data and here's what we found, when people are literally sitting there in the thread commenting saying, no, this is not right.
Yeah.
Like people are literally standing outside your door, like protesting, and you're sitting there like, the data says that you don't matter. Like it's very frustrating.
Yeah,
and I
have people coming and going, no, like literally I have this function in my code right now. I use it every day. No, sorry, you don't count.
And it's not like, it's not like these are people that are just random strangers that are like, passing by and commenting. These are people that are like known in the community or work in like some large projects. Their opinions do matter, like they took the time instead of working to come over here and post a comment on this thread to like showcase a use case that you're not covering. And you're just going to be like, nah, data says no. Like
in some cases, they spent considerable time like drafting and editing a reply they put in this thread too. Which
right.
Is just
like, I don't know. At this point,
I think this should just not be added. Like, I think this is a bad idea.
And I said that earlier. If it gets added as it is right now, I just won't use it. And I'll recommend other people don't use it because it's incomplete. It's
right.
There are essential bits missing.
Yeah. And it's
pun intended.
I think what's also a little odd here is that, like, it used to be that the default was to say no because yes is forever. And this does not feel like, it does not feel like that ethos is here. It does not feel like there's strength to stand in that conviction. It feels like, well, there is a lot of pressure to add this thing, so let's add it, but in a way that we're comfortable with. Which, like to be honest, if that's your position as a maintainer, this is probably not the career for you, right? This is probably not, like, if the Go team is going to interact with people like this, then there need to be other people that do the community interacting part, right? Because, like, I think there are people that posted in this thread that will probably never participate in a thread again. if we're gonna figure out a way to have conversations and that don't demoralize people, we have to be open to the idea that the way that we center, or the way that, I think the Go team is mostly, or the most prominent Go team people are mostly white, the way that white people interpret these words. I think we need to really bring in other cultures and other communities to understand how they would refer to things and how they are saying things, and to not just say, oh, that thing seems rude, so I'm going to call you out for being rude to me. Even if that's not rudeness, that's frustration. Even if that's not rudeness, that's just trying to hold people in power to account, right? I think the biggest problem here is nothing to do with the format or the tool. It is the discourse and the lack of, and I don't know, maybe microaggressions is the wrong term here, but like the subtle hostility that exists. Like, fundamentally, why is this proposal still in final comment period? Why is it in likely accept? Like, that is sending a subtle signal to all of us that, like, hey, this thing's gonna happen, and you can comment, but we're not moving it out. We're not gonna rehash this. That's what that signal is sending subtly to all of us, is that put up your fight if you want, but probably not gonna change it.
Yeah. It was not even subtle, and I don't have the link pulled up, but this has been discussed, and unless there is some significant change, we're not going to change this API. We're doing what's already been stated.
Meanwhile, we're all like saying, here's significant change that I want to raise. Yeah, I know. It's
like significant change,
stupid.
But there's no qualifier of what significant change. Significant change to you? To who?
Right.
Like,
right.
Yeah.
You need to qualify
on
that
both
statement.
sides, really. Like, to be fair on that one, like on both sides, the Go team themselves can't define what significant change is, and then on our side, like, is removing new a significant change or not? Well, maybe, I don't know, depending on what we define this as. Like, without a definition, we're all just aimless.
Yeah. Today, it's not significant, but once they release the package and it's out there, then it becomes a Go 1 compatibility breaking change, and they have to support it forever.
Yeah, which is what I said in my comment. I was like, this is just setting us up for future issues, and we've already did this before with like the new. Remember when everyone had the new pointer function in all of their code, because we finally had generics, and now we needed a way to have like pointer literals in a way for things that didn't have pointer literals, and now we have new.
Take
like,
the address of a literal value.
Exactly,
value.
Yeah.
And now there's new in the language because the problem was so widespread. And do we really just want to do that again? Like, and again and again? Like, stop. Only add what's asked for and nothing more.
I mean, also too, like the level of controversy here, choose one of the other paths. Like, you could do, like, look at the JSON v2 package, right? They spent years refining that API, testing it, getting to people's hands. They had it in a separate repo. Maybe it went into an X. I don't remember if it went into an X, but then it was like, now it's in a language, but still behind a flag.
Right.
So it's escaping the Go 1 compatibility. Like, if there's this much if there's this much controversy around this, go that path, right? Put it behind a flag. Put the API in there. Put it in a release. Gather feedback from people. Actually put it in the next couple of surveys. Or make a survey and ask the US team to go do a survey about this, see what people are using, go do an ecosystem-wide analysis, figure out what people actually want, or try and define that, come up with hypotheses, run experiments, do that work. And then add it after we are very sure. Add it when the conversation becomes hey, I have little quibbles with some of this, but I agree with it. Or when most people are of that opinion, when it becomes like I don't agree with this, but it's not like I think that this is the wrong path. It's I would have done that differently. I would have chosen a different way of doing that thing. And if we were discussing new and people were saying, well, I think it should be V7 or I think it's V4, but we all agree that we should have this function, that's a very different conversation from we fundamentally do not believe this function should exist. And like, we should be doing more exploratory. We should be engaging with a broader part of the community if there's this much pushback in an issue. And I think like that's where this should probably be starting at the end of the day. So
yeah.
Anyway, we need to wrap this up. Long one. Any last thoughts, comments from y'all before we close this out?
The Rust community is accepting members. No, I'm just kidding.
I've 6 different times now I've tried to go dive in and learn Rust, and the syntax just loses me.
It's a lot of syntax.
And really it's when you get to the backtick lifetime annotations on, like, it just gets too esoteric and complicated, and it's like,
Dylan,
now I don't know what it's doing.
Let's not start a whole other podcast. I asked for last comments, not let's talk about a completely different programming link.
All right, so final comment, shameless self-plug. When you're unhappy with the standard library UUID package, I know where there's an alternative that supports the full RFC and has active maintainers.
Shots fired.
GitHub.com/GOFRS/UUID.
Mic drop.
Well, viewer/listener, what do you think of that conversation? We covered a lot of ground there. We all said a lot of stuff. I said a lot of stuff. Matt said a lot of stuff. Dylan said a lot of stuff. But we want to know, do you agree with us? Do you think we're all off base? Do you think that there's nothing wrong with the Go proposal process and everything is great and this is just like fine conversation discourse? Like, let us know. We do appreciate your feedback. We love having conversations with y'all in Gopher Slack and Changelog Zulip and on social media. So just, reach out. Let us know your thoughts. We will incorporate them into future discussions. This episode of Fall Through was hosted by Chris Brando with co-hosts Matthew Sanabria and Dylan Burks. Fall Through is produced by Chris Brando, and our beats are by Breakmaster Cylinder. Complete.